Welcome back, folks. Jay Saki here, and now it's time to talk about Babe, Pig in the City from 1998.
One rule that's rarely broken in the movie industry is the sequel is never as good as the original. Babe, Pig in the City breaks that rule. The first movie, wonderful as it was, and it was good enough to be nominated for a Best Picture Oscar, was like a dress rehearsal for this one, which is enchanting.
So I remember this one more strongly than the first. I think I saw it last back around 2005 because back then cheap bargain bin DVDs were becoming a thing and my mom picked out what was available. I know I'd seen it around that time and also a few years prior at a relative's house. To my memory, it was pretty good.
The movie is sophisticated with wicked wit and subtle social commentary, and it's colorful and delightful and funny, too. In no way is it just a children's film, but one of the most original films of the year and one of the best, too.
To my memory, audience. I seem to remember it was at least funny. I remember some dark moments and heartfelt moments. I could not remember all the specifics, but my memory told me it was much better than it had any right to be. So, how does it hold up now, Jay Saki? Remember my joke I mentioned about the first movie being a dark descent? But I had to clarify later I was being hyperbolic since it was more just a down the rabbit hole story, which isn't the same thing as Dark Descent. Well, Babe, Pig in the City is a dark descent, and that's not being hyperbolic. I dare say it's a descent into madness.
Who has made an even better film than the original. I was startled how much I liked it.
This is a magnificent, towering achievement. We're dazzled by it.
This is one of those insane movies that exist so YouTubers can make videos about it, with the title, WTF, this movie was a thing. And yes, this movie was famously made by George Miller of Mad Max Fury Road fame. He also has a writing credit and producer credit. And it's tough to talk about this movie for a lot of reasons, but the problem this movie poses is there's an insane amount of effort put into every aspect.
What's amazing is the way special effects, animatronic models, and real animals are combined to get these stupendously convincing and amusing shots.
But the effort was all in vain because it didn't become greater than the sum of all its parts and it just became a mess. So what's it about? Basically, the story takes off where the last movie ended. Babe becomes a prize-winning pig because he learned to herd sheep, and Farmer Haggett gets invites to show off Babe to all sorts of important events that could make him money, but he prefers the simple life and just stays put. Then one day, while lowering himself on a pulley down his well to fix something, Babe becomes curious and falls into the well, thus upsetting the pulley weight, and Farmer Haggett almost gets killed and is put in a body cast. So the movie starts off with Babe almost killing Farmer Haggett. Then the bank comes to foreclose on the farm, so Farmer Haggett's wife, Mrs. Haggett, decides to take Babe across the world to show him off at one of these important events in the hopes of making some money off him. They wind up in a city after missing their flight, and they're stuck there for a while, and then there's hijinks. So this movie is not worth watching, and I should just say move on, but I spent a good deal of time composing my thoughts for you, so please indulge me while I ramble as best I can about what I saw in this film. So Mrs. Haggett and Babe are stuck in the city, and the city is an ambiguous compilation of all famous cities. It's New York, Hollywood, Paris, Tokyo, all in one. The point is, it's the city and not the country farm. So Mrs. Haggett and Babe need a hotel to stay at that takes pigs, and none will accept, but they get tipped off about a specific hotel by a guy with a pig nose who apparently likes pigs. This hotel is run by a lady named Miss Flume, who loves to hoard animals. Cats, dogs, and chimpanzees. So they stay there, and there's this guy named Uncle Fugly. Yes, his name is Uncle Fugly, and he does a clown show with the chimpanzees to entertain kids. And Uncle Fugly is like a mute who can barely talk. Uncle Fugly likes Babe, so he steals him, and then he tells Mrs. Haggett with a special language that only Miss Flume can translate that Babe ran off. So Uncle Fugly is basically a mentally handicapped guy who's a horrible thief. Make of that what you will. And Mrs. Haggett goes out into the city to go looking for Babe. Meanwhile, Uncle Fugly and the chimpanzees go to a hospital to do a show for kids, and Babe is part of the show. But Babe goofs up and destroys the show, and Uncle Fugly is devastated and is carried away in an ambulance a couple days later, apparently as a result of what happened. You don't see Uncle Fugly again in the movie, and it's implied he died. Good riddance. Meanwhile, Mrs. Haggett is wandering the city looking for Babe, and she's in a rough part of town where she's out of place. So let me describe this scene. There's two cops hanging out with a bunch of women standing around in their underwear, fawning over them. Also a guy in his underwear. In fact, the more I think about it, I think half the people in the scene, men and women, are all walking around in their underwear. And I specify underwear since they did not look like swimsuits. Maybe they're supposed to be standing outside a strip club, but there's no strip club in sight, so it's just a very strange scene. Mrs. Haggett is calling out, "Pig! Pig! Pig!" And she offends some skinheads playing street hockey wearing rollerblades, and one of the skinheads is like, "Who are you calling a pig?" And this leads to them getting into a fight, and Mrs. Haggett throws the skinhead, and he's on rollerblades, so he rolls into the cops, and there's hijinks. And you might be thinking I'm hyperbolizing by saying they are skinheads, but I looked over the scene carefully, and one of the guys, besides having the skinhead appearance, also has a German World War I cross on his leather vest, so I don't think I'm wrong. And of course, this all leads to Mrs. Haggett and the skinheads all being arrested. Blah. Back at the animal hotel, the animals are all going hungry, and so the chimps go out looking for food. But Babe wants to go with them, so the chimps try to kill Babe by tricking him into going into an alley with murderous dogs. It's very apparent this was an act of murder attempt, but the movie never addresses it again. Maybe everything I described doesn't sound so terrible, but it really was all very ugly, and this film felt like a fever dream. Speaking of which, at one point that song from Inception played. You know, this one. And of course it brought to mind the obvious joke that this whole movie is in fact a dream, and Inception is the sequel to Babe, Pig in the City. And it makes sense because in the opening scene of Inception, when they are still in the one guy's dream, they chuck him on the carpeted floor, and the guy talks about hating the carpet but remembering it was definitely made of wool and not polyester. You know, sheep's wool, because sheep live on a farm, like in Babe. It's all connected. Bah! So this movie tries really hard to be about how Babe is small, but has a big heart that will save the day, but he is honestly the destroyer of everything in this story. He almost gets Farmer Haggett killed. He does succeed in killing Uncle Fugly, but Uncle Fugly was so awful I wasn't bothered by his death. Also, by the end, it can't make up its mind what kind of ending it wants. Babe goes back to the farm in the end, but it makes some grim jokes about the future of some of the other characters that is depressing, like it doesn't care how it wants you to feel. It just throws in desperate dark humor. So in summary, this was a fugly fever dream of a movie featuring adults acting like children, and a hero who only ever makes everything worse for everyone. If he did fix something, it's only fixing the problems he caused. And all the characters are horrible people, but the movie doesn't really address how horrible they are. And I don't have time to get into it, but the only characters who seem to go through a moment of growth end up having tragic endings in the story. So, did we learn anything, Jay Saki? Well, it got me to revisit the song from Inception. By examining the pronunciation of that song, I learned it would take a day for me to figure out how to pronounce the name since it's a French song. I think I might add that song to my playlist though, and I definitely don't think I'm going to be learning French anytime soon. I meditated on the reality that sometimes you can put so much effort into something that doesn't pay off. My view is great art can have partial mistakes so long as it becomes greater than the sum of its parts. And Babe, Pig in the City, for all the effort, did not achieve this. You can't deny Nazi Germany had a lot of effort that just didn't pay off in the end. The Soviet Union, a lot of work, but it did not become greater than the sum of its parts. Red Chinese? No thank you, please. And Babe, Pig in the City is really kinda bad. But I don't regret watching this movie for one very simple positive element I have not yet mentioned. The ending song. Just when I thought I had seen one of the worst movies ever made, the credits rolled and I heard a beautiful voice that sung me the following. A kind and steady heart can make a gray sky blue, and a task that seems impossible is quite possible for you. A kind and steady heart is sure to see you through. It may not seem like very much right now, but it'll do. It'll do. When you find yourself in the middle of a storm, and you're tired and cold and wet, and you're looking for a place that's cozy and warm, you'll make it, you can never forget. A kind and steady heart can conquer doubt and fear. A little courage goes a long, long way, gets you a little bit farther down the road each day. And before you know it, you'll hear someone say, "That'll do, Saki, that'll do." No one had ever told me those words before, and it gave me hope where I thought I had none. And I listened to those words again, and again, and again. To think it took watching something so terrible and ugly for the human soul to in the end give me something so good and beautiful. And so, can a horrible movie be redeemed by such a beautiful message? The answer is no. Because then all one would have to do is end every horrible movie with the Lord's Prayer and declare it redeemed. But Obviously, life does not work like that. Movies don't get redeemed that way, and neither do our souls. Your movie can't be great on a technicality, and you don't receive salvation on a technicality. Movies have to be greater than the sum of all their parts, and we have to be greater than the sum of all our parts. You out there in the audience have to be greater than the sum of all your parts, or else all you have to look forward to in your future is eternal darkness. That is all. That is all I have. Have a good night, audience.